Hello and welcome back to the Find Your Feet podcast, a podcast show dedicated to helping you get closer to your true, authentic self by helping you find your feet in life. We are joined by an incredible guest today, Britt Frank, and she is a psychotherapist, an educator, and a trauma specialist. She speaks and writes widely about the mental health myths that keep us stuck and stressed. So she just recently released her book, The Science of Stuck, which I've been listening to on Audible, and I absolutely loved it. It was such a practical book about all the different mental health problems we all have, all the different mindset blocks we have, everything that just holds us back in life across from career, relationships, how we feel about ourselves, managing anxiety, everything. It's such a great practical book, and we were so excited to sit down with her today and pick her brain and ask her more questions. She's so knowledgeable about everything to do with the psyche and your mental health. So get ready for a super jam-packed, value-driven episode. Okay, Britt, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here.
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties, but we finally made it. Um, so I just would like to start off with just you introducing yourself to the audience, just letting them know what exactly it is you do in your role as a psychotherapist and obviously an author as well, and what actually led you to getting into the work that you do. Because I think that people that end up doing like careers and jobs that are of service to so many people, they've normally come from some sort of pain or difficult time themselves. So what is your sort of background story to why you do what you do?
Which, I kind of hope so, because I wouldn't want to go to a therapist personally that had a perfect life. That would just really annoy me. So, just respect to people who had perfect lives. But anyway, I'm Britt, and so I'm a licensed psychotherapist and I'm a trauma specialist. And I just wrote a book called The Science of Stuck, and that's my forward-facing, shiny, I'm very well credentialed resume. And then the stuff underneath that is I was a drug addict and I was a love addict and I was just a disaster with mental health issues and relationship issues and all kinds of craziness. And I found my way to a therapist who actually helped me. And once I started to get better, I'm like, everyone needs to know this. This is like, if people knew this about their brains, we would not be all feeling as crazy as most of us feel most of the time. So then I went back to grad school in my early 30s and became a therapist. And here we are.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, I love your energy. I can't wait to chat more with you today. Yeah, I loved reading your book. I actually listened to it on Audible. So I was like out on my morning walk. So I was listening to you. I really, really enjoyed it. It just like covered off so many like areas of your life to get unstuck with. But one of the things that you mentioned when you were sort of describing your story when you were in the book was that after when you were going through that period of a difficult time, when you were struggling with your mental health, you said you fell into sort of like a religious cult. And I found that really interesting because I know that this happens to a lot of people. And I'm so curious about why, when we are struggling with our mental health and we're in sort of like a vulnerable position, we fall prey to like cult like systems. Like, what is it our brain is actually seeking? And what is like the healthy alternative to actually not getting into a cult? What are we actually looking for when we get drawn into stuff like that?
I love that question. And I haven't talked about that a whole lot on this, book tour, but it's so fascinating. So first, I want to say that not all cults are the mass suicide, beating up gay people, kind of thing. Like a cult by definition is a group of people that are essentially brainwashed into believing something and they're following a leader, and they're isolated, but it doesn't always have to be violent or super awful. So that's my disclaimer. It's not all Westboro Baptist Church types of things. Because in the media, we hear about these very extreme cults with a lot of really, really high level stuff. The cult I found my way to, it really appealed to me because it was sort of like just add water and stir and you're okay. If you read this, if you pray like this, if you believe this, if you go to these groups and if you say these things, you're good. And the
Mm.
idea, and don't worry about your past, just let it go. Let it go and let God. And all of a sudden I didn't have to deal with my shit. As long as I did what was expected, I had brothers and sisters and moms and dads and people in my life who were happy to take me in and hug me and feed me. So it's very appealing. when you're given this, what looks like an easy bypass to your pain. It's like, don't worry about that. It's just like, I'm too blessed to be stressed and I just give it to God and I'm good and yay. And it's like, no, that's a bunch of horseshit. But it's very appealing. Sorry, it is. Because um, I was not in the business of owning the things that had happened to me, nor was I in the business of owning the things that I did in reaction to the things that happened to me. And, we're not responsible for what happens to us, but we are responsible for what we do about it. And I didn't want to deal. And cult life gave me, I fell in I loved it until it stopped working, of course. Like once it stops working, it stops working. Because I actually enjoy my mind and thinking and learning, and that's not encouraged. But I can see the appeal for people who want to belong, who feel isolated and disconnected, and who don't want to deal with their crap. Cult life gives you an out, but it comes at way too high a price. So I stopped doing that.
Yeah. So what do you think, what are we seeking there when we're in that vulnerable position or our mental health is struggling and we're falling into cults and stuff? Is it that we're seeking, obviously you said there, like you can basically take the responsibility off yourself a little bit for having to deal with whatever state your life is in at that time. But is it as well like just craving that? Is it because we don't have strength within ourselves at that point? So we're handing off our power to other people? Like what is our brain sort of seeking? Is it structure? Is it stability? Like what's a healthy alternative that people could go to instead of falling into stuff like that?
Yeah. And I don't think it's a strength issue because I do believe that within every human lies the entire reservoir of strength and inner resources. That doesn't mean that we all have the same access and the same privilege, but I don't believe that people are inherently broken. So I think that cult life, one, like you said, is structure, it's stable, it's consistency, it's routine. And if you're talking about trauma healing, structure and stability and consistency and routine is fantastic, but it needs to be mindful and conscious and open to editing and subject to change as you get new information. So I think it's appealing, one, because of the structure and the consistency. It's also a way, if you're feeling disconnected, to immediately feel connected and not have to do any of the work of building relationships. It's like we all talk the same language, we all read the same stuff, we all parrot the same, guru type person. So there's that. And I think people really want someone else to bestow goodness upon them. And I think people are so concerned with goodness that we forget that wholeness includes all of the good and all of the super ugly, mucky grossness. And when we pursue goodness at the expense of wholeness, we're going to end up in some fuckery. And really, a drug addiction, relationship issues, cult life, it's all the same thing. We all get into those variety of, I've been in really, really toxic relationships. And if that's not the same dynamic as a cult, I do not know what is, right? But it's the same thing. It's someone to bestow goodness on me, to tell me who I am, to tell me I'm okay. And it is very much outsourcing our power. I agree with you 1000% on that. I don't feel like I have inner strength. I do, and you do, and so does everyone, but I don't believe that. So I want somebody else to tell me I'm good. But wholeness requires a dig underneath the dark side of the psyche, and it's gross down there. So we have to be willing to honor our humanity. There's no such thing as a good person. We're all messy and we're all mucky underneath, and that's okay. No shame. That doesn't mean everything we do is okay, but that we all think really crazy thoughts. And I know that because I'm a therapist and I hear them all day long from very shiny looking people. Up close, we're all thinking, oh, like if I held a microphone up to everyone's mind, it'd be like, holy shit. Like that needs to be okay. That's how we get well. That's how we become whole, by acknowledging all that stuff.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. You mentioned as well the word bypass. So, and also in your book, you spoke a lot about, like, you would mention in like quite a lot of the chapters about sort of the really positive, like wellness, high vibes sort of world, and how that can actually really not be very helpful when you're trying to get unstuck and just, like get where you want to be and be healthy, be happy. Do you think, like, because from my personal experience as well, like, because our audience, they're very interested in spirituality as well, like, but on our podcast we love to talk about a whole, where like it's the Find Your Feet podcast. So we're trying to help every single listener find their feet in life, whether that's in their career, their relationships, their friendships, their self-esteem, their confidence, like productivity hacks, everything. We cover it all. And we talk about spiritual concepts as well, but we always love to combine it with science, psychology. And I think, you brought so much of that to the book, but you mentioned about the wellness world, and it's sort of that toxic positivity and that good vibes kind of culture, and how that can really not be helpful. And I've definitely experienced before where I've been very much thinking in that sort of spiritual mindset, and then life has come and served me like a bit of a shit sandwich, like a difficult situation. And I was like, at that point in time, I hadn't been focusing as much on the sort of the psychology aspect and your having that resilient mindset in that way. And I felt like spirituality in that sense, I was like, oh, I feel like it's like failed me a little bit here, because I feel it doesn't give you that much resilience to deal with life's difficulties. And your book and your work that you're sharing is so much about helping people deal with life's difficulties. So I just thought it was interesting in the book what you said all about all that kind of stuff. I'd love to know some more of your thoughts on that, and like how it's actually not, it's a bit counterproductive.
And I love spirituality. And I think the
Mm.
problem that a lot of spiritual practices get into, again, is this bypassing. Like, we want to skip over the gross stuff and just good vibes only, and my good vibe tribe, and too blessed to be like, all of that is not real. And whether you're talking about mental health or spirituality, those are both searches for truth. M. Scott Peck, who wrote the book The Road Less Traveled, he defined mental health as a commitment to reality no matter what. And spiritual seekers, whatever path we're on, is ultimately the search for what is true. What is true about who I am? What is true about this world that I operate in? And the problem with positive thinking is it's not true because you're ignoring the negative. And it's also the same problem with negative thinking. Like, if I actually don't like positive or negative thinking, because both of them ignore the other half. And again, spirituality, mental health requires wholeness, and wholeness requires the light side and the dark side and the good stuff and the crappy stuff. And so any spiritual practice that takes you out of the reality of pain, out of the reality of suffering, is not a spiritual practice. Then it becomes an addiction. Then it's just like, I'm just going to huff my meditation so I can hover above the reality of humaning. True
Mm.
spirituality enables us to tolerate our humanity, not to somehow get away from it. Like, if you're not in pain as a human, at some point you're on something.
Yeah, no, because I felt like I had gone, because I think in the pandemic everyone was at home and they had a lot of time to think. So I think a lot of people collectively had a similar experience in that they dived deeper into spirituality because they were spending all this time at home thinking that they weren't around it. The world was completely different to what it is now, and I think that I had gone quite deep into that, and then life came and was like, oh, here's a big problem, and you have to sort this out. And I was like, my current mindset of just heavy spirituality is not helping me at all. So now from that one experience, I'm like, wow, you've really got to have a well-rounded approach. You've got to look at the science, the neuroscience, the psychology, the mindset. You've got to look at it all. You can't just look to one thing. And I think sometimes when you are in that vulnerable place of poor mental health, you can end up looking at just that one thing of like maybe spirituality. So because it does sell you on that good vibes, think positive thoughts, things like The Secret, the book like that by Rhonda Byrne, like stuff like that. If you're not in a totally sound place, you can be misled slightly. So I loved in your book how you were mentioning things like that, but you were just giving so much practical advice and realness. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. But one of the things that I found so interesting in the book was the chapter about motivation and the myths around motivation. So our audience, they are very interested in productivity and all that kind of stuff, hacks, how to be more efficient, how to get more done, how to be more successful, how to chase your dreams, all of that stuff. And I found the whole segment about procrastination, why we do it, and that you're not actually lazy, the myths about motivation, and that actually procrastination, lack of motivation, it's actually a trauma response. So I'd never heard that before. So I'd love you to just sort of explain that more to the audience, and then we can dive into like what actually that is and why we do it, and then how can we get over it so that we can override that sort of self-sabotaging behavior, even though it's coming from like a misguided sense of like self-love, really.
Yes, and I love that you said that it's a misguided sense of self-love, because how much do we shame, "Oh, I'm such a procrastinator. I'm so lazy. I know what I'm supposed to do and I'm not doing it. What's wrong with me? I'm so unmotivated." And none of those things are accurate. Now, some people get really pissy at me. They're like, "Well, are you just saying it's okay to sit on the couch and watch Bridgerton all day?" I'm like, "No, I'm saying there's a reason you're doing that, and it's not because you suck. There's something happening in your brain that's it's not an excuse, it's just an explanation. And the word procrastination doesn't describe what's happening in your physiology when you get stuck in the I can't answer another email, or I just can't start that business plan, or I just can't get to the gym, to whatever the thing is. So you can't talk about motivation or procrastination without acknowledging that you have a central nervous system. And this is bananas to me that most therapists are not taught about this. And most people aren't taught growing up, hey, guess what? You have a brain and it lives inside a body, and your nervous system has a thing called the fight, flight, freeze response. If your brain thinks you're being chased by a lion, you're not going to be chasing your dreams. You're not going to be doing anything except trying to survive a lion attack. But the problem is people will say, well, why is my brain perceiving a lion attack? Clearly, there's nothing wrong. I'm safe. I have enough to eat. I have enough money. What's my problem? What's wrong with me? It's like, well, the part of your brain that's going into fight, flight, freeze is not the same part of your brain that understands logically what's true and understands rationally that you are in fact safe. And so instead of fighting our personality or trying to summon willpower, what we need to do is acknowledge that our brains don't feel safe. And in order to get motivated or to get out of procrastination, we have to disable the fight, flight, freeze response. And if we're not taught how to do that, we're going to try to think our way forward, and that doesn't work. And we're going to try to shame our way or will our way forward, and that doesn't work. At least it doesn't work in a sustainable way. And so knowing you have a brain that lives in a body and your body does stuff takes the shame off of it and gives us accurate language, because you can't solve a problem if you're not naming it. Like if I go to the hospital with a busted knee and they put a Band-Aid on my cheek, it's like, this isn't the problem. That's the problem. And so knowing that procrastination is an amygdala response, even if you don't think you should have one. And when people come to me in therapy and they're like, nothing's wrong, what's my brain doing? I'm like, okay, look outside. You may be safe, but global pandemic, freaking monkeypox, the world in crisis, like countries on fire, the world burning down to the ground. Like, you may not think you should be in fight, flight, freeze, but your brain has been protecting you for a very long time, and it will always prioritize safety over productivity. So in order to get to productivity, we have to learn what is the language of safety, and how do we teach our brains to feel safe enough to do the things on our to-do list. Like, you cannot chase your dream if your brain thinks you're being chased by a lion.
That's so interesting, because when you mentioned about the pandemic, I definitely feel like during the pandemic, me and loads of other people wouldn't we couldn't really do that much. We were in our houses, but in terms of productivity, it was like I wasn't doing anything. So I think a lot of people as well have felt a bit frustrated with themselves, because they've been like, oh, I feel like I've lost 2 years, like, 'cause you haven't really moved forward. But you couldn't move forward because of the state of the world. But I think also, like, our brains just were not there to move forward either, because all they were focusing on was not catching it, our family staying safe, not freaking out over the scary news every day. So because now that that's all gone, like, you can see the world's back in motion and the momentum's back with people working, everything, like, you can see it's all gone back to normal. So that's so interesting. So if someone's like is just at home and they're like, I keep procrastinating on a project, and they know now, right, well, it's because my brain thinks it's unsafe. So let's say it's like they're procrastinating to start like a new business or something that they've always wanted to do. It's a dream, but they just keep putting it off, put it off, put it off. What can they do to sort of overcome that? And why would maybe like the fear of starting that business be making them procrastinate so much?
That's such a good question. And the thing with the pandemic that I heard every day was, I have all this free time. Why am I not being productive?
Mm,
And it's like, that is not
yes.
free time. Free time implies that you have choices and you have mobility to do whatever you want to do. It is not free time. It's empty time. It's dead time. It's open time. But it's trauma time, because none of us had a choice about what to do. So let's say you want to launch a business. Okay, fine. let's start with taking an inventory of what is actually true about the safety and the support of your life. If you're in a shitty marriage with an abusive alcoholic partner, if your child has a chronic illness and you have a parent with dementia, like, sorry, your brain can only tolerate so much. So, first ask yourself, am I being realistic with what I'm expecting myself to be able to do? Because if my expectations are here and the level of safety, support, and resource in my environment is here, this is not going to work. And that's not your fault. And it sucks. And then the work is grief, not productivity. Then the work is, how do we stabilize your environment? Because launching a business, you're going to need support. You need an infrastructure of some sense of stability inside yourself and some sense of stability in your environment, at least enough that you can get moving. And if the answer to that is no, fine, let's do other things first so we can get you ready to launch the business. If the answer is yes, I have everything I need, there is no logical reason why I shouldn't be or why I can't be starting this business, then I would say, what is the fear driving the procrastination? Are you afraid of financial ruin? Are you afraid of your image changing? Are you afraid of failure? This one's a kicker. Are you afraid of success? No one wants to admit to that one. But people are terrified of success. Why? Because when you get successful, a lot of your friends are going to go away. Misery loves company, but success can be lonely. And if we can't talk about that, that's like one of those underbelly truths that no one wants to talk about. But I hear this
Yeah.
every day. I'm afraid if I get fit, I'll no longer be attracted to my partner, and then I'm going to need to leave this relationship. I'm afraid if I make a lot of money, I'll realize how unhappy I am here, and I'm going to want to leave and move. It's terribly disruptive to our lives to be successful and happy and fulfilled and abundant and expansive. It's worth it. But if we can't talk about how scary it is to succeed, we're all going to keep ourselves small and stay stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the first time I heard that you can fear success, and I was like, what? But then I was like, oh, it makes sense because, as well, if you're going to become a successful person, let's say it is in business, you're going to have to become a more responsible version of you. You're going to have to show up differently. It's that you're leveling up as a person. There's more on your shoulders. So that in itself can be scary and people can put that off. But it's so interesting. But I've never ever thought about procrastination in terms of like, well, what is your environment like? Like, how comfortable and secure and safe do you actually feel? Because during the pandemic, I definitely was like, why am I not doing enough? Like, I've got plans to do things, like I've got so much free time, why am I not doing it? Da-da-da. And it's like, now we're out of it, I'm like, okay, I can see why you weren't doing that. Now the world's back in motion, but we don't realize at the time, and we're really, really harsh on ourselves. But it is crazy how, as people, we stay in our comfort zones, what's comfortable, even if what is comfortable is actually a really shit situation. And yeah, so interesting. But I don't think you mentioned burnout in the book, but I would love to get your thoughts on like the complete other end of that, because I always hear like there's so many people that are like obviously giving out advice like hustle, get up at 5, do all these things, and other people are like, no, have balance, don't do that. Like, and it's so confusing. And for ages I was like very confused myself from all these mixed messages, and I just thought, like, whatever, I'm just not going to listen to anyone, I'm going to listen to myself. Do I think? And that's obviously the right thing to do for everyone. But what are your thoughts on burnout? Because I know that you know quite a lot as well about neuroplasticity and sort of this idea that we can essentially reshape our brains and train them to operate differently. So in terms of burnout, like, so let's say someone is like starting a business or taking on new projects, that they're like they're climbing up their career, because our audience, they are like finding their feet, so a lot of them probably will be in that stage of career building, so they're taking on new things, they're building up. So but they're all conscious wellness lovers, so they'll also probably be a bit like, I don't want to get burnt out, self-care, want to do that at the same time. What are your thoughts on burnout? Because I feel like there's this culture now that's like completely demonizing it and demonizing working hard and sort of the idea of hustling and stuff. But with neuroplasticity, can we not actually, with time, in a healthy way, train our brains to be working faster, more efficient? Or like, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I love it when people come to me for therapy and they're like, "Can you just teach me how to not be human? Like, I just want to maximize and optimize and really be like, I want to be here. So can you help me get rid of all this human stuff?" It's like, sorry, no, you cannot neuroplasticity or hack your brain away from your humanity. It's just not possible. And this is not a popular take, but I'm going to share it anyway because it's true and it helps. Because burnout, again, the flip side of procrastination,
Mm.
but we focus on burnout as the problem. Burnout is not the problem. Burnout is the symptom of the problem. So we all get focused on, oh my God, I'm burnt out. And what do I do? It's like, okay, well, if you're burnt out, it's because somewhere along the path from when you hit go to when you burned out, that you were not being honest with yourself about what you're doing, about its impact on you, about how much you actually want to be doing what you're doing. A lot of people will hustle and take on projects because they think, oh my gosh, like I'm building a business, I have to say yes to everything, and if I don't say yes to everything, then I'm going to fail and I'm going to go completely broke, and then I'm going to be blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, well, how true is that? That's not true. That is not a truth. And if you don't get in the habit of challenging your own beliefs, you're going to be driven by them. And burnout is either the result of probably a variety of factors, but burnout is almost always the result of completely misattuning with your own sense of who am I? What do I want? And given my actual environments, what is a reasonable ask of my nervous system? Right? Because burnout just means your central nervous system is like fried and sputtered, and it's like, we're done. Burnout is actually a really appropriate response to ignoring the fact that we're humans. So, again, if you have a stable home and you have a supportive family and you have a safe environment and you're burning out, then we need to look at, okay, well, are you doing what you actually want to be doing? A lot of people will enter in because they think they should. Like, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you have to be doing it. And if we have this disconnect between our reality and our actual authenticity, we're going to suffer. And we're either going to suffer in the form of burnout or in the form of shutdown. And both are survival adaptations, right? Procrastination is a brain that's stuck in freeze. Burnout is the result of a brain that's stuck in fight or flight. And all of those are trauma responses. So if you're experiencing burnout, the first thing to do is take inventory. One, what's my environment actually like? Not what do I wish it was like, but like, what is my environment actually able to support in terms of my output and my productivity? And then two, where am I not being honest with myself about the things that I'm doing? Because I switched from cult addiction to drug addiction to love addiction to workaholism. That one was a great one because it's so socially acceptable. But if you work, I mean, it is, it's like you get lots of pats on the head
Yeah,
about girls,
you
but
do.
workaholism is a way to bypass pain. Like, you cannot work enough hours to avoid the fact that you're sad about stuff or that you're mad about stuff or that you're afraid of stuff. So until we make it safe to be human, we're all going to either burn out or procrastinate.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. One of the other things that you said in the book was about, you obviously had a massive chapter about anxiety, and a lot of people suffer with it, and maybe you've even developed suffering as a result of everything that's been going on in the world from the last few years, which is very understandable. Um, but you were saying about how anxiety always has an origin and that it doesn't just come out of nowhere. And I thought that was really interesting because I've like struggled with anxiety for years, more so when I was younger. Like, I just didn't even know what it was, so I really couldn't keep a lid on it, whereas now I'm very aware of what it is. It's very well managed, but still, even sometimes I will just get over, the bodily symptoms of it all just come in like that, and it feels like it's come out of nowhere. So when you said that it always had an origin, I was like, God, but sometimes it just comes at you and you just think, where has this come from? I was all right before, having a great time, and now a few hours later I'm like, what? Like, feel like, yeah, I've been like wiped out. And I think that a lot of people will probably resonate with that. So what is going on there? And if it always does have an origin, but it's coming as these overwhelming waves that of like, were just totally unexpected, what work can we do so that we can find the origin and clear through it, so that, and become aware of it, to minimize those symptoms?
And as someone who also, I still struggle with anxiety, so I have a great deal of compassion on how awful it feels and how hard it
Mm.
is and how debilitating it can be. So I'm in no way invalidating the pain of it. However, anxiety is the smoke alarm of our brain. So the smoke alarm isn't attacking a house. it's there and it's screeching and it's yelling because there is a problem. So even though, and a smoke alarm doesn't go off out of nowhere, assuming it's functional. A smoke alarm will go off if there's smoke, even if we don't see it. And even if we, like carbon monoxide detectors, same thing. I may not realize that there's like a problem in my house, but that's why I have alarms. Anxiety is our brain telling us, hey, you may not recognize that there's a problem, but there is in fact a problem, because anxiety never comes from nowhere. Now, the good news is you don't need to find the origin. Can it be helpful? Yes. But like, if I'm in a green office right now, my office is painted green. Let's say when you were a baby, you were in a green nursery and your parents had screaming fights in front of you every single night from birth to 2. You may not remember that, and you may walk into my office and start panicking and have no idea. And there's no way we're going to figure out, hey, when you were 1, your parents would fight in your green nursery. But our brains are picking up pieces of information and putting them together. So you don't need to torture yourself with what's the origin. Sometimes it can be enough just to affirm, I don't know where this is coming from, but my brain is on my side. It's not attacking me. And then instead of why am I feeling like this, the first question is, okay, what are my choices for people or places or things that can help my brain feel safer? Because when we go into what's wrong with me? Why do I feel like this? It's coming out of nowhere. We're actually ramping up the physiology that we're trying to calm down. So just by saying, oh yeah, and this happens to me still, like I'll start panicking, quote, out of nowhere. It's like, okay, I don't know what this is, but okay, brain, you have the data that I don't. So clearly you're getting scared by something. So, okay, my task here is not to figure out what your problem is. My task is to figure out what feels safe in this moment. And coming up with a game plan. And again, we're not taught how to do this. I wish kids were taught, hey, guess what? Let's make a list of 10 people, 10 places, and 10 things that help your brain feel safe. Songs, music, smells, friends, pets, whatever. And then do fire drills. And so it's like, quick, go grab 3 things that make you feel safe. But if we're not trained how to do that, when we panic as adults, we're just going to spin. So do a safety check, create a safety plan. And when you start getting anxious, pick something and then do it. And then do another thing. And then do another thing. And then once your brain settles, then we can look and see if we can figure it out. Sometimes we can, which is great. And sometimes we can't, which is not a problem.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting that you don't actually have to find out the origin, because I think the self-development world can definitely be very, very obsessed with finding out the origin. There's a reason behind everything why you feel, find it out or dig it out, and then, you can be healed and let it go. It's interesting to hear you say that, that's not actually something you have to do, because you never think, oh yeah, like you said about the green room example, that could be actually triggering you, and your conscious mind is never going to realize that. But it makes so much sense.
And I love the why. I mean, I'm a therapist and I like diving into the analysis and why do we do what we do, and there's a place for that. But if we're talking about in the moment when you're struggling, what do we do? Asking why is not a good question. It's not you do like, and even if you knew if you're sitting in my office panicking and somehow miraculously we suddenly discovered this connection between the green nursery and my green office, that answer to your why is not going to help you feel better, because I could explain why I had a lot of the things I had, but knowing our story is not enough to heal it. We have to teach our brains how to access safety.
No, it's exactly, because when you said as well about rather than freaking out like, oh, I am having a symptoms of anxiety, I'm feeling really anxious, why am I feeling like this, instead of just sort of acceptance of, okay, I am feeling like this, even just acceptance of it in that moment brings it down a whole nother level. And just being like, right, okay, this is how I feel, that's fine. Like, because I think the more that you're like, why is it here? Try and resist it, the worse it gets. So that's why I always try and do straight away is just like come to some sort of acceptance and just think, well, yeah, maybe I was absolutely fine this morning and now I don't feel fine, but that's okay. Like, let's just accept that. But this safety list is interesting because I've heard like, people love to like, people that have anxious tendencies love to like watch the same TV show they've already seen, stuff like that, because they know the plot. Yeah, do you do that? I've got a go-to as well for stuff like this. So is stuff like that, is that what you should kind of compile on your safety list of like things to do? Because I always think some of the things that I like am drawn to watch, like Justin Bieber's YouTube documentaries that I've seen 1,000 times before, like that just calms me down. Like it always makes me feel better and takes me out of my head. And I always think, oh, that's so bizarre and strange. So you think, is that the thing that you should be doing? Because I don't know, because I guess the self-development world doesn't really tell you to do that. Like it will tell you to go and maybe meditate. And yeah, maybe meditation might help you, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes when you can be too anxious to even be able to sit down and actually meditate. So yeah, so is that the kind of thing we should be adding to our safety list? Like little
Yeah,
random
and
things like that.
the wellness world has great tools. So I'm not saying don't do these things, but what I am saying is let's expand our vocabulary beyond take a deep breath and meditate. Because when you're anxious, trying to go inside your brain is like, that's not a good idea because your brain is feeling unsafe. And taking a deep breath can actually cause you to have an anxiety episode. Because if you're forcing breath into your body that's doing short breaths because it thinks you're in trouble, it's going to perceive the deep breath as an attack. That one was like when I learned that. So I never
Yeah.
force myself to take breaths. But watching
Mm.
the same shows, I do this too. West Wing. I have seen all 7 seasons of West Wing at least 10 times because, again, it's familiar, it's comfortable. I know what's going to happen. And I'm certainly not saying, like, take a smell of an essential oil and watch your favorite show and all will be well. Like, this is not a magic cure all. What we're trying to do is deactivate your amygdala response so then we can turn your thinking brain back on. Because the mind work, the thought work, the challenging our beliefs and our stories, that's great work. But if our brain is freaking out, we have no access to our logic. So, first step, turn the amygdala off, watch a show, take a bath, pet your dog. If you don't want to meditate, don't do something else. And then step 2 is once you turn your thinking brain on, then let's implement all of that wellness world stuff. That's so great.
Yeah, yeah, because I love meditating and I try and do it every day. But it's definitely something that I feel is more of like anxiety preventative because it kind of keeps me. It's like that little 10 minute a day sort of opportunity for me to just actually calm my body down, even if I wasn't necessarily feeling that stress anyway, just to give myself that little break, my nervous system that rest. That I think then keeps anxiety at bay. But sometimes when you're feeling like up to here with anxiety, trying to sit down and meditate, it's not always helpful, especially the breath stuff. I actually heard Andrew Huberman talking about that on a podcast the other day about the certain type of breathing that people tell you to do when you need to calm down actually makes it so much worse because of the biological changes you create. So interesting. But in your book as well, you mentioned this type of therapy called internal family systems. And I'm really curious about this because I have heard Gabby Bernstein talking about it a lot recently because following like a difficult mental health period she had, this type of therapy really, really helped her. And now she's gone and trained in it and she keeps talking about it. And I'm so curious about it. So what exactly is it? And, why is it helpful, this different kind of therapy?
And I love that she is talking about it because I have found of every single tool I have ever learned, like as a human and as a professional, internal family systems is like the single most potent thing for helping us with whatever our dilemma is. And so what internal family systems is in a nutshell is acknowledging that our brains, our personalities is not this like, not our brain, our minds, our personalities is not this like singular thing. Like, have you ever felt part of me knows that I should make a sales call and then I should answer my email, but there's this other part of me that just wants to smoke pot and lay on the couch and do nothing. So internal family systems works with those parts. Like, that's not a metaphor. There actually is a part of you with its own beliefs and stories and ideas. And there's another part of you with its own beliefs and stories and ideas. And so the idea is that within us, and internal family systems was created by Dr. Richard Schwartz. And he actually wrote the foreword to Gabby's book, and which is like, yes, IFS,
Oh.
internal family systems. He says, There's like an entire society of people inside of our own minds, and they're all different ages and they all have different agendas. That's why you can feel completely grown and capable in 1 minute and feel like a toddler in the next, and then feel like an angry teenager in the next. And so this model really teaches you how to get to know all of these parts of yourself and then working with them as a team instead of feeling like you're fighting yourself. Our personalities are not, it's not that you have multiple personality disorder. It's that we're designed, everything that's complex has multiple parts, right? Like every system has multiple parts. Like I have a microphone and it has a stand and it has a screen and it has, a tree has leaves and bark and roots. I don't know why we think our personality is this like one thing, but it's a complex system. There are inner children, inner teenagers, inner toddlers, inner infants, like all kinds of things happening in our minds. And it's really about befriending all of them, even the scary ones.
If you've been relating to some of the things that Britt has been talking about in this podcast episode so far, or you've just really been feeling like you've been struggling with your mental health recently and you haven't really known where to turn to, you want to get therapy, but you just don't know where to seek somebody out, how to know who's good, we have the perfect resource for you. Our podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, who are a professional, secure online counseling service. So wherever you are in the world right now listening to this podcast, as long as you've got an internet connection, you can access BetterHelp services. It's all done from the comfort of your own home, so you don't even need to have a computer to do it. You can just do it on your phone. However you feel comfortable to talk to a therapist, they will work around you. So whether you're happy to do video calls or that is just a bit too much for you and you rather just do a phone call, or if even that is too much and you want to take it at a very slow pace, you'd prefer to just do a chat box or emails and have therapy that way, that is totally fine and they will work around you. You also don't need to wait a really long time to access therapy with BetterHelp. By just filling out the really quick 5-minute questionnaire on their website, you will then be assigned with a therapist that is perfectly aligned with you and whatever you're currently struggling with right now. And you will be matched with them in just 48 hours of signing up for an account. And even if it turns out they pair you with a therapist and you just don't click with them, you don't vibe with them, and you are not that keen on them, you can change for free as many times as you like until you find the right therapist for you. But it's really important that you do connect with your therapist and find somebody that you feel really relaxed around, so you really open up and get the most out of the experience. And we have a discount for you all. So if you just head to the link betterhelp.com/finding your feet, that's betterhelp.com/finding your feet, you will get 10% off your entire first month of therapy with BetterHelp. Yeah, no, wow, it's amazing. And it just got me thinking then when you were talking about that, about how it can make you feel emotionally one age in one situation and then an emotional completely different age in another situation. Because I think it was in near the end of the book you were talking about emotional regression, and I'd never thought about like our emotional growth like that at all. And I thought that this was something I definitely wanted to talk to you about, because I thought it's so fitting for this podcast, Finding Your Feet podcast. They're transitioning out of that like into, well, I say that we've got listeners that are like much older as well, but everyone's doing it regardless of age. We're all doing it at different periods of time. But I thought emotional regression tied in so well with the process of finding your feet in life. So I'd love you to share a little bit more about what that actually is, because I found that so interesting, because I've definitely felt that before, where like you could feel so confident and feel your age or potentially even older in like maybe your career, but then in relationships you're just so scared of intimacy and all this other stuff, and you're like, why do I act like a child here when I don't act like there's so much disconnect in my life? This doesn't make sense. And then when I heard you saying this emotional regression, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. So like, what is it and how can we emotionally grow at the appropriate age and like be healthy in that way?
Yeah, and if you don't know that emotional regression is a thing, you're going to feel crazy. I mean, I felt
Yeah.
absolutely like I could go in and give a presentation and then I'd be in like the fetal position on the floor crying because my boyfriend didn't answer a text. It was like, "Oh my god, I must be crazy." And it's like, "No, you emotionally regressed." So emotional regression just means for whatever reason, you do not feel your chronological age. So if you're 30, you may feel 4. If you're 25, you may feel 10. So anytime you feel younger or smaller than your actual age, that's regression. And so like in Alice in Wonderland, I've read this with this lens. I'm like, "Oh my god, she eats the mushroom and she grows and then she shrinks." I'm like, Yes, I get that now. And so, in order to find your feet in the current place where you are your current age, it helps to ask which part of me is feeling scared or in distress. Like, how old does this part of me feel? And, the first antidote to regression is curiosity. Instead of, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Or, oh my God, I'm crazy. Oh, okay, this is a thing that's happening right now. Okie doke. How old does this part of me feel? Because if I feel 13, I'm going to need something totally different than if I feel 2. And so, in order to intervene with the right coping skill, we need to make sure we're matching. Like, a lot of people are like, self care is kale smoothies and Peloton workouts and bubble baths. It's like, if I'm an angry, raging 16-year-old, I will throw that kale smoothie in your face. I will tip over the Peloton. And it's like, no, I don't want a freaking bubble bath. So we need to figure out what are things that the version of us at that age, what is it that they need? Most teenagers generally need like pizza and friends and video games and movies. And so if I'm feeling like a ragey 16-year-old, I may need to carve out time to do that. But if I'm feeling like a terrified infant, that's when I'm going to need like a weight blanket and, like a warm something on my midsection or someone I trust to hug me. And so it's really a game of matching. How old do I feel? And what does that part of me need? And that's where our interventions will likely succeed versus this mismatching. It's like, what's wrong with you? Just, I took a bubble bath and I did this and I don't feel any better. I'm like, yeah, because you regress to age 2. And a 2-year-old doesn't care about those things. What does a 2-year-old care about? Creativity and playing and toys and safety. Again, the safety issue. So we have to match the age that we regress to with whatever we're doing to solve the problem.
Is emotional regression a very common sort of thing that people have, or like do pretty much all of us have it? And because I think that all of us mature and grow in confidence and self-esteem at very different ages and periods of life, depending on so many different factors. No one's the same. So do you think emotional regression affects all of us, but we're all at like slightly different points with it?
I think we all experience it on a continuum. We don't all experience it in the same intensity at the same time, in the same degree. But our personalities are made of multiple parts and they're not going to sit back and be silent. They want to be seen and they want to be known. And the goal of working with your internal system is not to shut everybody up so they all quiet down. It's to let everybody have a place. Everyone has a seat at the table. Some of my greatest joy comes from letting my inner children come out to play. So do we all do it? Yes. And look at the holidays. For therapists, November, December is like tax season for accountants. Everyone loses their shit around the holidays because we're all regressing and nobody understands that. Like, even now, I'm a therapist, I understand regression and I teach this. But if I go to see my family of origin, I'm 16 and I'm going to stay 16 until I leave. And I know that now. But if you don't know that your family can trigger regression, what do we do at the holidays? We all get together with our families and then wonder why everything is going completely off the rails because of regression. So yes, we all do it for sure.
Yeah, no, that's so true about the example about Christmas time. I think we can all all relate to that. So I wanted to talk to you as well about relationships, because you had a section of one of your chapters that was kind of about dating and stuff like that, and you said something that I was like, oh my gosh, again, I've never heard this before. This is so interesting. So you said about with couples that they get this like couples cocaine brain chemistry that lasts up until about a year of them into the new relationship, and then it starts to come down and your sense of judgment starts to come back. And I've never heard that before, but obviously I know that so many people experience that sort of dating high and all that stuff that happens at first, and how, yeah, obviously things are going to get a little bit more, not boring, but a little bit more, you're going to get more familiar and used to it when it's been about a year anyway. But so what is this couples cocaine brain chemistry? Like, what is this hormonal thing that is going on? Why does it take a year for your brain to come back down from it? And what are the consequences of this happening in our brains? Is this why like maybe relationships might break down after a year? Like, does it cause that much of an impact? Like what is going on?
And I love, like, knowing this made my relationships a lot less chaotic. And I've since gotten married, and it's generally functional, which is really nice knowing this is how it works. So, and again, we forget that our minds live inside of brains, and our brains have chemicals and all kinds of things. So when you're in a new relationship, you've got all of these chemicals that are making you feel really high. That's why you get in like the la la la, like loopy, lovey dovey. I can't think about anything except my partner, and I can't eat and I can't sleep. Like, there's a reason for that. And it's because your brain is doing things. This is why it's so important, if you're going to date, to make sure you have friends and a life that can support the fact that you're going to be high for the next few months. And that's why it's so important to check in with your friends. And you don't need your friends' permission to, date your partner. But if you are hearing from lots of different people, hey, we've noticed this about your partner and that's kind of odd, that's important, because your brain is basically high. And why does it take a year? And it's not like it's not like, okay, it's day 366, you're good to go. But generally, trust is built over time with consistency. So consistency plus time equals trust. So going through all 4 seasons, going through a full rotation around the sun, going through different stages of life, you can see your partner. How are they over the summer? How are they over the Christmas holidays or whatever holiday you celebrate? How is your partner when it's gross out? How is your partner when it's nice out? How is your partner when they're drunk? How is your partner when they're sober? You need a variety of data points in order to feel like you have that trust. Like, I had a girl I work with say to me, I've been with my boyfriend and things are going so great, but I don't feel like I have that like total trust. I'm like, well, how long have you been dating? 4 months. I'm like, I've shit in my fridge longer than you've been dating this person. So it's like, you can't expect yourself to have that sense of safety and trust without consistency and without time. And it takes about a year for all of that to settle. And so really pacing our relationships. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to break up with someone if your friends don't like them. And it doesn't mean you have to not date. It's just being mindful that your brain might be missing out on some flags because of the chemical high. I think we've all
Yeah.
experienced that. Like, I've overlooked
Yeah.
red flags for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we all have done that. So interesting. But you also said as well about you were kind of like debunking the myths about romance and relationships that we've kind of all been fed from, Hollywood films, all that stuff, Disney stories. Actually, you really made me laugh when you were making the actual direct comparisons with some of the Disney stories and how like toxic they are in terms of encouraging, like, I think it was Beauty and the Beast, and you were like, kidnapping, all this stuff. I was like, God, I've never thought about that. But you said something really profound, was that love isn't always enough to sustain a relationship. And I think we are all brought up to think that love is enough to sustain it, and like love is the all like mighty thing, and if you've got that, then it's fine. But so why is it not? What is your views on all of that stuff?
And I'm not anti-love. Like, I'm and from a spiritual sort of like metaphysical lens, love in the end does conquer all. And I do believe on a
Yeah.
spiritual level, we're all connected, and love really at the end of the day is all that's real. I get that. But
Yeah.
again, we live in human bodies and we are having a human experience. If love was all that you needed, the love of a parent would make sure a child never got sick. The love of a spouse would make sure that their partner never developed an addiction. It's like, you can have all the love in the world, but that does not give us an out of the fuckery of humanity. So love is great, but you also need things like safety and consistency and trust and things like that. So the feeling of love is great from a spiritual lens. The feeling of love is absolutely not enough. It is not sufficient to sustain a healthy relationship over time. It's just not. It's great, but it is not the only thing. We need other things too.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I love that section of the book because it really was like a dose of reality and very, very practical advice about relationships, that because I think we're not given enough practical advice about relationships. We're fed like all the Hollywood like random just stories that just don't reflect reality and what we actually all go through in like the love and dating world. But we'll just bring our interview to a close. I have absolutely loved talking to you. You have provided so much value to me and to the audience. And I absolutely loved your book. So I really want to encourage everyone to go and grab a copy of Science of Stuck. Like, I listen to it on Audible. You've got such a lovely voice. So, if anyone listening loves Audible, it's a great book to get on there as well. But could you just let everybody know like where they can find you, where they can get copies of your book, what you've got coming up, and like how they can support you?
Yeah, and thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I love talking about the dark side of the psyche. It's so fun. So I'm on Instagram at Britt Frank. You can find out more about the book at scienceofstuck.com, and you can buy the book wherever books are sold. Wherever you buy books, it'll be there.
Amazing. We will leave links to your Instagram and places to pick up the book in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your time, sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us and Britt for that conversation. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did and learned as much as we did. If you want to pick up a copy of Britt's book or you want to follow her on Instagram, connect with her further, we have linked everything of how you can get in touch with her and support her in the show notes of the show. We really hope you enjoyed this chat. If you loved it, please share it on your Instagram stories. Tag us, tag Britt. Let us know what you thought. We love getting DMs from you guys and hearing what you thought about the show. We release episodes every single Wednesday, so make sure you are subscribed and leave us a star rating as well on Spotify and Apple to really support the show and help it grow. But you don't need to wait until every Wednesday to catch up with us. Come and join us on our social media platforms at Find Your Feet Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, where you can see what we're up to every single day. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.